Hello, welcome back to Middle East in Depth, part of Levant TV's Press Reviews. An article in the Deutsche Welle looks at the visit of Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who has arrived in Berlin for a two-day visit. Despite the group's association with terrorist activities, the Deutsche Welle considers Egypt's crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood opposition figures something that would make the visit appear as controversial by those who want to see reform in Egypt, as the paper says. In all objectivity, what I find controversial is the Deutsche Welle's title. Upon his arrival in Berlin on Wednesday, the Egyptian president was welcomed by German Chancellor President Joachim Gauck with full military honors at Berlin's Bellevue Palace. Al-Sisi is scheduled to meet with German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier later on Wednesday and German Chancellor Angela Merkel on Thursday. The editor then insists the visit is controversial in Germany, while Merkel's government is keen to maintain a cordial relationship with one of the Arab world's biggest players. Other officials, including Bundestag House Speaker Norbert Lammert, have been critical of Egypt's lack of democratic development. However, Lammert's Christian Democrat colleague Volker Koder struck a much more conciliatory tone in an interview for Egyptian television. He said, "I have found al-Sisi to be a convincing and a credible man. In politics, that certainly means something." Koder, who is a fierce advocate of Christians' rights in the Arab world, who met the Egyptian president several weeks ago in Cairo, said, "Mr. al-Sisi assured me that he wants to lead a democracy in Egypt. Overall, I have a very positive image of him." A group of human rights organizations, including Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, wrote a letter to Merkel encouraging her to make it clear in public and in private comments during al-Sisi's visit that Germany's relationship with Egypt was dependent on changes in Egyptian government policy. A statement accompanying the letter stated, "German authorities are well aware of the terrible human rights situation in Egypt today. Chancellor Merkel should speak out against Egyptian government policies like shutting down peaceful protests and mass arrests solely for alleged sympathy with the Muslim Brotherhood." But no matter what the Deutsche Welle thinks of the visit and of al-Sisi's ousting of former President Mohamed Morsi in a 2013 coup, the German newspaper admits Mr. al-Sisi has since been elected president by a landslide in an election in which 47% of eligible voters participated. And this is a huge figure in Egypt. Let's move now to a humanitarian part, where Javier Solana, former Secretary General of NATO, is featured in an interesting article in the Beirut-based Daily Star with a controversial title stating "Europe gains by being more like Lebanon over refugees." Solana reminds us after World War I, when millions of European civilians were made refugees forced out of their homelands by enemy occupation or deportation, an international regime was developed to coordinate effective responses and ease the suffering of those who had been uprooted. A century later, another refugee crisis is underway, and this time it is Europe that has the power to provide safe haven to desperate people. Yet it has not risen to the occasion, with many of its responses failing to match the urgency of the situation. Positioning themselves as guardians of national identity, many argue that populists in Europe face a mass. The populists argue that Europe faces a mass influx that threatens to place even greater strain on its economies, labor markets, and cultures. But one does not have to look back a century to see how dangerous the consequences of such rhetoric can be. According to Solana, the populist narrative is not just inflammatory; it is false. Although it is sometimes difficult to distinguish the drivers of displacement, data from the United Nations Refugee Agency show that at least half of those trying to reach Europe from North Africa are fleeing from war and persecution. The International Organization for Migration, together with Italy's Navy, has determined that this year the migrant hail mainly from Eritrea, Gambia, Nigeria, Somalia, and Syria, countries where conditions entitle their citizens to request asylum. In short, Mr. Solana concludes this is a crisis not of immigrants, but of refugees, and it is showing no sign of slowing. Indeed, he argues, with instability and violence plaguing much of North Africa and the Middle East, the decline in armed conflicts since World War II seems to have slowed and could even reverse. The international community, he adds, is legally bound to protect those who are being forced to flee their homes by conflict and persecution. Dr. Solana adds Europe is not the only region that has been burdened by today's migration flows, or even the most effective. Lebanon, he says, a country of just 4.5 million people, has taken an estimated of 1,116,000 refugees, roughly equivalent to the population of Brussels. Given this, it is difficult to justify Europe's failure to agree on a system of relocation and resettlement for a total of, say, 20,000 refugees this year, distributed among 28 countries according to individual quotas. Dr. Solana recognizes that indeed many European countries have accepted very few refugees so far, making their inaction even more difficult to comprehend. Spain and Greece, for instance, have each accepted only about 4,000, a meager amount when compared to Jordan or the Lebanon. The former Secretary General of NATO adds last century, in both world wars, Europeans were the ones fleeing from persecution, with the number of displaced people now at levels unseen since World War II. Europe has a responsibility to recall its history, and it should take the opportunity to respond to today's refugee crisis as it would have liked the world to respond to its own suffering and to prove that the EU's value extends far beyond its borders. That was it for today's interesting articles. For more updates, please visit levant.tv. Or subscribe to Middle East in Depth on iTunes. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.